war is awful. Its costs are always severe. But some governments are evil and their ability to wage war must be destroyed. One of the fiercest air campaigns of the Second World War was the American and British attacks on Axis-controlled oil refineries in Ploesti, Romania. Around 6,000 bomber sorties were flown against strong German and Romanian defenses at Ploesti over the course of 27 months of fierce fighting. The most infamous of these attacks, Operation Tidal Wave, was a risky, low-flying assault with hundreds of American B-24s releasing their payloads barely above the smokestacks. Tidal Wave resulted in a 30% loss rate of Allied bombers and more than 300 Americans killed in this single attack on one day, all in a desperate effort to deprive Nazi Germany of energy, of literal fuel for its war machine of conquest and death. But Ploesti was far from the only target of its kind during the war. Allied bombers launched brave attacks against oil fields, refineries, and plants in Romania, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Poland, Yugoslavia, and many other nations. Other high-value targets of Allied bombers were hydroelectric dams, with the British inventing bouncing bombs that would skip along the surface of water, then sink and detonate to breach dams from below. In Operation Chastise, 19 British Lancaster bombers flew into mainland Europe just above treetop height in the dead of night to attack 4 German dams, successfully destroying 2 of them. In this heroic attack by the famous dam busters, Allied bombers suffered a 42% loss rate and 53 British airmen died in a single night. All to deny German industry, including civilians, power. Missions like these were some of the most dangerous in World War II, but they crippled Nazi-occupied Europe's infrastructure and slowed the Axis' ability to wage war and commit its ethnic cleansing. Allied strategic bombing destroyed power plants, factories, harbors, railways, airfields, bridges, and much more throughout Europe and Asia. Now, we in the West live in a bubble of modern comfort. We live away from threats. We live far away from the reality that some in this world have malicious goals. So it is easy for our moral compasses to spin away from north. Some modern thought leaders decry cutting off your enemy's power supply and other utilities as collective punishment, war crimes, and genocide. Let's be perfectly clear, in conjunction with its military counterattack against those who launched a vicious assault on its civilians, Israel has cut both the external supply of fuel as well as its free flow of electricity into the Gaza Strip. These actions have deprived Hamas, who controls Gaza, of its primary sources of power. And yes, this also negatively affects Palestinian civilians. Let's also be clear about who Hamas is. Hamas was elected to rule Gaza in elections in 2006, winning a majority of seats with 44% of the vote. And then Hamas quickly banned future elections in Gaza. Sound familiar? The founding Hamas charter stated that our struggle against the Jews is very great and very serious, and claims that Jews have been behind nearly all wars and economic crises. Sound familiar? Hamas wants Palestinians to cleanse their ancestral land of Jews and believes bloodshed is a tool for the conquest of this land. Sound familiar? Hamas believes 100% of Israel belongs to Palestinians, from the river to the sea, as they say. Hamas, on October 7th, 2023, launched what it called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, a coordinated attack on Israel that started with an artillery barrage of at least 3,000 rockets fired toward Israeli civilian population centers. At the same time, an estimated 2,500 armed-to-the-teeth Hamas terrorists penetrated southern Israel on foot, in land vehicles, and by paraglider. The primary targets of Hamas's operation were civilians, including unarmed victims at a concert, in homes, in cars. Over 1,000 Jewish civilians were massacred as they ran, hid, begged for their lives. It was the largest extermination of Jewish civilians since the Holocaust. Evidence points towards Hamas having an approval rating of slightly over 50% among Gazan citizens. Not all Gazans endorse Hamas, but don't delude yourself into the make-believe notion that most Gazans oppose Hamas either. Reality is not clay you can playfully mold to fit your dreams of instant world harmony. Reality is a curse of hard truths. So if you think this situation can be negotiated out of, then go ahead. Try to obtain your empty promises from Hamas that guarantee peace in our time. But here is the reality. Nobody could live with a neighboring government ceaselessly seeking your extermination. Nobody could live with a neighboring government teaching its next generation that your ethnic group is behind every war and economic crisis. For a supposed two-state solution to ever work, Hamas has to be destroyed. Israel has no choice but to depose Hamas. Every civilian death in this war will be an enormous tragedy, but the Gazan government must be deposed. That is reality. But some in the West reject reality.
The desire for freedom resides in every human heart.
In their naive, pseudo-intellectual armchairs, they decry that civilians should never be negatively affected by war.
The Israeli government has cut off electricity, food, fuel, internet.
This present situation of collective punishment and
the United States should be urging an immediate ceasefire.
I wonder if they would dare apply that same logic to the horrifying but necessary wars waged by our ancestors. Would they tell the Allied airmen of the Second World War that the attempts to deprive Nazi Germany of energy were immoral? If you would like to wink along with such fantasies, go ahead. Look the airmen in the eye and tell them that their efforts were wasted. Tell them their friends and comrades who were killed over Europe and Asia were doing something immoral. Tell them that not only should Axis-ruled nations have lived with full, uninterrupted power, but the Allies should have provided power if it ran out. Tell them the Nazi government and its Jew-exterminating leaders should have been endlessly negotiated with. Tell them Germany should have been allowed to reconquer its so-called German ancestral land beyond the borders that had been set by an international treaty. Tell them we should have responded to Nazi invasions with calls for ceasefire. If Hamas didn't want to risk its civilians dying, it could stop launching rocket artillery barrages from school playgrounds. It could stop storing munitions in mosques. It could stop establishing military headquarters in the basements of hospitals. It could unconditionally surrender. Above all, it could have not gone out of its way to lead an operation to slaughter Jews back on October 7th. I started this video by saying that war is awful. Its costs are always severe. But some governments are evil and their ability to wage war must be destroyed. Hundreds of civilians died in the Allied raids on Ploesti, Romania, and I don't think most of them were ardent Nazis. Thousands of civilians died when the dam busters flooded the German countryside, and many of those deaths were of anti-Nazi forced laborers. 1 million or more civilians across Europe and Asia died during Allied strategic bombing efforts to bring Germany, Japan, and other Axis nations to their knees. This tragic cost of human life wasn't a reason to let the Axis powers survive. Thankfully, Israel's modern military tech is keeping civilian deaths in Gaza from getting anywhere close to the same rates as in the air raids of 80 years ago. Israel doesn't just have air superiority over Gaza, it has total air supremacy. If Israel possessed the same fiery, taught from a young age ethnic hatred that its enemies have for it, Israel would simply carpet bomb Gaza to oblivion. But it hasn't done so. Instead, it has smartly relied on surgical airstrikes and careful ground thrusts to target Hamas leadership and Hamas resources. This is how Israel intends to suffocate Hamas's war machine and bring peace to the region. Meanwhile, modern thinkers with no track record of improving the world romanticize reality with claims such as, "You can't bomb your way to peace." I would tear up that wishful thought, which is so immature it doesn't belong anywhere past the bedtime stories of elementary schoolers, and stuff it into your nearest paper shredder. Listen instead to Barnes Wallis, the brilliant British engineer who invented the bouncing bomb used in the Dam Busters raid. Wallis once said, "If enemy power supplies' destruction or paralysis can be accomplished, they offer a means of rendering the enemy utterly incapable of continuing to prosecute the war." So, I don't think it is commendable for geopolitically stunted narcissists in the West to stand on their social media pedestals and paint themselves as unblemished masters of peace by arguing that there is never a cost to doing what is right. There is a cost to doing what is right. There is no fairy tale formula to peacefully get rid of an evil government, but somehow not so much as inconvenience nearby citizens, many of whom approve of that government. As George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army under FDR, said, "Victory of the democracies can only be complete with the utter defeat of the war machines of Germany and Japan." Unfortunately, Israel faces a similarly evil war machine today. The utter defeat of Hamas is coming at a cost. If you want the world to be a better place, do not call for a ceasefire. Call for Hamas to lose its resources. Call for Hamas to lose its popularity. Call for Hamas to be utterly defeated.